Ready?
Welcome guys, gals and non-binary pals to this week's episode of Buffy Boys, your complete review of Buffy the Vampire Slayer from a queer, literary and feminist perspective. My name is Joel, I'm one of your hosts. With me as always is your other heroic host.
Brian, how's it going?
Pretty good. How are you?
Yeah, feeling a bit weird.
Yeah. Do you know why you're heroic?
No?
Because you're my hero. And also, like Buffy, you've been on a seasons-long journey to figure out when to finally stop talking.
And also, I keep changing my shoes in between shots.
You do. And sometimes you're significantly bulkier.
Bulkier?
That was meant to be like a stunt actor thing.
Just call me fat.
But that they come across as a reach. Okay, off to a fantastic start. We are here, Brian, of course, to discuss Season 7, Episode 22 of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Chosen.
Yeah, okay, so this episode was written and directed by Joss Whedon, who last wrote Lessons and last directed Once More with Feeling. It was aired first on May 20th, 2003. I remember that day. And here's a Buffy on summary. Caleb revives and Buffy halves him. Angel gives her Lila's file and talisman. She sends Angel away. He is needed in LA and gives the talisman to Spike. She is too young, she says, to make permanent choices. The first taunts her that she will die alone, giving Buffy an idea. She has Willow cast a spell, giving all potentials full Slayer powers, and marches her army into the Hellmouth, where they hold the Ubervamps until Spike's talisman becomes a lens for sunlight, burning him and all Ubervamps. Anya and Amanda die. Sunnydale collapses. Buffy escapes with the others. Her future is now open.
I think the phrase Caleb revives and Buffy halves him is actually a nice economical piece of writing.
Yeah, I think that's actually pretty good. I would have used the phrase bisect.
So, where do we want to start?
Yeah, so I think what we remarkably the last couple of episodes we mentioned that we'd love if people wanted to write in. It'd be really cool. We would read some of your emails and tweets and etc. On the final episode. And people actually did that, even though we gave them the vaguest, bizarrest instructions of all time. People genuinely did. And
I thought you were going to do a bit where you're going to say no and rogue game, but we actually got loads of responses.
We got loads of responses, and we got too many responses to reasonably read in one episode. So some of them we have written back to, and we'll maybe get back to at some point to kind of like read them on something else.
Yeah, I have done a dramatic reading of every piece of mail we've gotten to Brian while drunk. So
it's true, and I did cry. And what I really took away from it is that, like, specifically, we were very much part of people's pandemic experience. That a lot of people ended up listening to the podcast while, like, either working from home and not knowing what to do with that kind of silence, or while trucking to work through, as essential workers. And stuff like that. And like, geez, that's really, really, really touching. It's really funny. There's a lot of people saying thank you in the emails, and I kind of feel like that doesn't seem like it's going the right direction.
Yeah.
You know, I kind of feel like we should be saying thank you to people for listening to, like, got to be close to 150 hours of our podcast. You know?
Yeah, and it's funny because we talk a lot of. I hate using the phrase inside baseball. It's the most accurate phrase, but I don't like sports metaphors or baseball. But we talk a lot, obviously, off mic about, the behind the scenes kind of stuff here, but we're not obviously as much on mic by virtue of what that means. But specifically what came across from a lot of the contact we have from listeners was that...
Well, they exist, for one thing.
They exist, which is great. It's always good to know. And that the specific things that you and I have often discussed, look, this is what we're trying to do with this is how we'd like to come across, these are maybe the things ideally we'd like to achieve for people, and sharing all that. Everyone, the kind of feedback of being, you kind of did those specific things for me, which is like really, really like
a couple of people saying that they kind of see texts in a different way now, which is like remarkable. Okay, Joel, would you want to do a reading of a couple of them?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to pick out a few of the great messages we've gotten in. I'm just going to read through them because a lot of kind of like really interesting detail in there, and also I think gives a perspective on the kind of person who kind of are kind of in the room with you, metaphorically speaking, while you're listening. So okay, so the first message we have here, so it's from, I think it says Smelly, is that right?
Smelly, that's right.
This is from Brian's sister Aoife. Shout out to Aoife.
Thanks, Aoife.
Thanks for your message.
I can't believe you started with someone who was clearly like, hoaxed into doing this. Go on.
Yeah, well, pressured, I think. Bullied.
Pressured, go on.
So, message for the last episode. Brian, ... smells, but also well done. I'm so happy that you make it the whole way, and it's been awesome to hear what you have to say. I say do BoJack Boys next.
Which is an excellent suggestion, honestly.
I think it's a very interesting suggestion, because I think, we have often said that there actually is obviously a lot to BoJack Horseman. It would be doable. It's fascinating, but also there's something about being two guys doing a BoJack Horseman podcast, which is so like to a certain kind of person that would make us insufferable, and they might be right. Yeah,
we're super gay.
We are. That's true.
But also, we're not committing to doing another podcast at this point, and that's important to denote. Yeah. We are not saying that we're doing another podcast. A bunch of people have said they will listen to other things we do. I'm not there yet personally, but it's like we have had the discussion. I
will also say, because I'll say what I would want to hear if I was listening. We haven't said no either, so we are talking about what we want to do next with our lives. Okay, next message from another Brian sibling. From Kieran. I know I put that so strangely. My message to Buffy Boys is thanks, Kieran. And Buffy Boys is so great that it inspired me after listening to 120 episodes of the podcast to then actually watch Buffy from the beginning and restart the podcast for a second time, which is fascinating behavior, and we're very grateful for it.
And like he's told me about this. He listened to the entire podcast. He had not watched Buffy before this. He listened to it. He loved the bronze banter part because that was like not aimed at people who had not seen the thing. But he found the Buffy part pretty good too. So
I think podcasts bring out really interesting behavior in people. And
he's on season 3 now, and I think he's really enjoying it actually.
I think we should acknowledge at this point, because I don't think we've mentioned this very much either, but the fascinating scenario with some of our friends and family who've listened, where occasionally they'll be like, "Oh yeah, so I watched that thing you recommended to me." I was like, "I didn't say that to you," and they're like, "Oh." Yeah. That was on your publicly available podcast. You said that,
100%.
It's quite funny.
Yeah.
Okay. Next up, we have
we're getting
the friends and family.
Friends and family first. Yeah.
First up first. From King, one of our
good friends,
and maybe one of our only Japan-based listeners for a long time. Now return to us. From King, hey boys, I've been a follower of the show since the start, and though I haven't always kept up to date, I enjoy binging your episodes every now and then. King does love a good podcast episode binge, and I relate to that.
Yeah.
When I was living in Japan, it was especially comforting to hear your voices, and each episode felt like a lovely little slice of home.
Oh.
I'm saying this in a tone that is not how King speaks.
Yeah.
I don't usually think about shows and other media in such an analytical way, so it was refreshing and entertaining to listen to you two wax lyrical about Buffy, and it was a great excuse to rewatch the show along the way. I have a much greater appreciation for it now. I'm sad that it's ending. I'm going to miss all the jokes and humour, which are distinct things apparently. But at least we can chat in person again. Love from your local fanboy, King.
Ah, so sweet.
It's really sweet.
Thanks, King.
Yeah. Okay, next up we have from our regular listener, Darcy.
Often a common communicator, often get messages and such from Darcy, which is really appreciated. Thanks, Darcy.
I imagine Darcy with like a little penget, kind of going woo boys, right? And it's really encouraging. And dear Joel, Brian and Pex, I want to drop a quick line to say how random but absolutely wonderful the last year and a half have been for me since I discovered your podcast. Around May 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic, working from home became really hard for me with my terribly stressful job. I wanted to get into podcasts as a distraction. I realised there's actually other Buffy fans out there in the world. What a wonderful thing to learn. I watched obsessively as a small child around 1999-2003. I tried a number of other Buffy podcasts that I just couldn't get into until I found you two. Your non-American accents really helped. No comment, but I'll take the compliment. I have listened to every single episode since, and it really got me through lockdowns. So thank you for continually recording an episode each week. I absolutely am too lazy to do something like this, and it's not a small achievement. I actually genuinely really appreciate that. It has been a lot of work. Darcy also suggested that we rate each other's top 5 episode ratings, which we'll do that when we go through the rundown. And I really am excited to figure out what the fuck was I talking about for some of those episodes.
Yeah.
Thanks again for all the one-sided chats. And to repeat myself one last time, you should definitely continue to the end of Angel. I get all my new TV show recommendations from your podcast. It's a reliable one-stop shop for good content. Someone else does all the hard work for me. Bless you both.
Thank you so much.
Incredibly sweet. Thank you
so
so
incredibly sweet. Like, it's actually like, it's one of those things where it's like, so getting messages like that is so bizarre because, we're sitting around just like talking about Buffy. It doesn't feel like something that people should feel like they are touched by or moved by or like worthy of engagement in some way. And it's bizarre. It feels fictional to receive shit like that. So thank you, Darcy.
We'll be riding high on that for a while, that kind of stuff. Okay, so next up we have a message from Annika, which is a great name, one of my favourite Star Trek characters. Hey, you two. In 2019, I started to rewatch my obviously favourite TV show from my teenage years, and I was obsessed with it. I was in awe of Buffy because she is such a role model. I cried over the last scenes where little women all over the world find their power and are ready to slay.
Same.
Which we will talk about. Also, I love Willow and was irritated about the Spike stuff that's happening. Why didn't I notice that when I was a teen? It's not healthy. I think we've all been there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I was sitting there April 2020 crying, and my favourite show was at an end. Pandemic had just started. I was hungry for more Buffy content and context, and then I found you. You're doing such a lovely job. I'm laughing with you. I'm angry with you about the patriarchy, and it's so enjoyable that maybe I plan to rewatch Buffy again episode by episode and hear your podcast after every episode. So I have to say, 10 out of 10 happy tears crying over Buffy content. I'm excited for your next project. I love your input. It brings you so much inspiration. Lots of love. Wow.
That is so sweet. Like, yeah, I like. I'm gonna run out of like things to say here because it's just like there's only so much I can say. Thank you, and like, wow, that's really kind.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So lovely. And I will plaster one of the rooms in the house with these at some point.
Oh, 100%. We'll put we'll cut all these out and we'll put them into a little scrapbook and leave it in the bathroom so guests can like thumb through it while they're peeing. And that sounds offensive, but I actually think that'd be really nice.
I'll put a title on it. Just humble things.
Yeah.
Next up from Ryan. I'll give you guys 10 non-binary pals out of 10. Love this show and listen to it during my morning commute every Wednesday. Go and miss it when it's gone. I look forward to whatever you guys do in the future, which I love. And I also have fished out of the back of the press that we have a mug that I got from our friend Dara, which says "Guys, Gals, and Non-Binary Pals."
It does, yeah. It's very sweet.
Me of it, which is really sweet, and that's really lovely, Ryan. I really appreciate that. And also, yeah, I actually really am taken back and quite happy to hear that people are like, "We'd love to hear what you would do next," because that's just, I don't know, it's creatively really like nice.
Yeah.
Okay, next up we have a message from Alan. Hey Buffy Boys, I've just finished this week's episode. Wanted to drop you a note to say how much I enjoyed listening to you two over the past couple of years. I found your podcast randomly at the beginning of 2020 when I was rewatching Buffy for the 500th time. I thought to myself, I love a companion podcast this time around. You can't imagine the joy I felt when I discovered a podcast that looked at Buffy from a queer perspective, and the joy was compounded when I discovered it was hosted by two Irish guys. That's us. I'm Irish originally and been living in Vancouver with my boyfriend for 6 years. Okay, so some Irish accents are always welcome in my ears. I ended up binging your podcast quicker than I could watch the episodes, and eventually caught up with the back catalogue. Now I look forward to your episodes every week. Do you think you could ever listen to our back catalogue, Brian?
No.
I think you would. I think if I died,
absolutely would not listen to it.
I think if I died, you would.
I would not. Oh, if you died,
how moggling would that be?
Yeah, no, I would listen to it if you died. You're right.
I would genuinely, back to Alan. I would genuinely miss listening every week, and there's a good chance I would just go back and listen again. Thank you both for caring as much about the show as I do, and for sharing all your thoughts and insights over the years. It's been a pleasure listening. You're also the reason I watched Pen 15, which is as much of a gift as anything. That one's for you, Ryan. I hope that makes you happy.
I mean, like, it is my discovery of this generation. Yeah. It is. Oh, it's so good. Thank you, Alan. I'm so glad to hear that you're watching Pen 15. It's so fucking good.
Yeah, absolutely.
And thank you so much for the message. So touching. Love that there are, like, diaspora Irish queers out there being like, oh, this is comforting and nice, and good. Thank you.
It's absolutely one of the things on our list of wouldn't it be wonderful would be to like give a genuinely because you and I care a lot about being Irish and like what that means in a weirdly like ironic way, so it's really good to be able to do that. So yeah, from Alan, if you boys decide to do another TV podcast, I'll happily listen. Even if I haven't watched the show, I don't even think I would do that for anything. So I'm very happy with that. Tempting.
And especially
something I've thought about would be because I think if we were to do something else, it wouldn't be something with necessarily the media market penetration that Buffy the Vampire Slayer has.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, BoJack is pretty popular, but like one of the other things I was thinking is Leftovers, which does not have a huge amount of listener or watcher base, or 6 Feet Under, again, not a huge thing either. If we're going to go more like down the line of what you would enjoy, like Babylon 5, like who actually watched that? No one. But yeah, it's an interesting one. So
next up we have a great message from Laura, who's also a regular
tweeter, discusser, a regular reply gal, but in a good way.
Yeah. Or as she self-describes, your occasional troll stalker on Twitter, aka me, Laura, 30 input. You've asked, and therefore I shall attempt to explain why I love your pod so much. You keep your episodes shortish, which is a great starting point. Like, I absolutely appreciate that as well.
Yeah.
So I like listening to you when I dog walk. It means I can get through an entire episode without having to stop. But you don't overanalyze, even though sometimes you skip some stuff. I sometimes skip your bronze banter. Maybe my favorite comment. I think it made me laugh so much. I really appreciate it.
We cackled this reading that out loud the other night.
Yeah.
And I fully respect it. I skip it too sometimes.
You bring such academic and philosophical knowledge to the themes of the show that might otherwise have gone over my head. I love the way you always try to defend Buffy. You were called the Buffy Boys for a reason. Actually, no, that might be my favorite. One of my favorite things.
That's very touching.
It's lovely. So this is interesting. Your discussion of season 6 really helped me see it in another light. I love Double Meat Palace, and thank goodness I'm not alone there. I still don't ache to watch dead things unless I'm on a full rewatch, but maybe I can finally appreciate that it is a harrowing episode for so many reasons. But as discussed, just because you don't like what you're seeing doesn't mean it's not worthy.
I would agree with that. I don't ache to watch dead things ever, but
absolutely.
I think it's accomplished.
Nobody enjoys the body for its content, but for a televisual experience is powerful. And I think there's a lot to say for things which are not fun but which are good. If it furthers a character's arc or storyline, then an episode does its job. If things are there to simply shock or be controversial, then I think that's where the show lets itself down. During the early seasons, I think Buffy the Vampire Slayer set so many high bars for itself that in later seasons, I feel it thumbs down and reverts to stereotypical TV shocks.
It can do, for sure.
Yeah, which is a really interesting thing to follow through. And as Laura says here, hence why I think seeing Red was poor for storytelling purposes. Willow was already capable of revenge, see her attack on Glory, so why kill Tara but to be cruel and controversial? Equally, Spike already knew he was a monster, so why have Spike attack Buffy as he does? Although he has already attacked Buffy by this point, and I'll fight anyone who dares to argue with me on that. See dead things, bronze balcony scene. Very valid point, I think we talked about that at the time. Yeah. It's incredibly fucked storyline in so many ways. The only reason I can see is that the writers wanted the audience to hate him, but I still don't think it. But it still didn't work with some fans. Absolutely true.
Like we discussed to death the concept of the writers just didn't know what to do with Spike because they wrote him to be a heinous, disgusting character, but then alternatively sometimes wrote him as dreamy, interesting, intriguing. The fans loved him, and it became a mess for sure.
Absolutely. I don't believe that Spike wanted his soul so he could be a good person. He wanted a soul because he thought it was the only way to have Buffy. And season 7 doesn't help resolve that for me. Messy storyline, messy season. If you have to explain the story and misdirect your audience, then you've done a pretty shitty job, in my opinion. She also mentions that she thinks our rankings have become higher because the seasons themselves have been poorer. And I can only see that there's less competition in some ways between episodes, Yeah.
I would say the individual episodes as well. As we were saying recently, I think the episode-to-episode content tended to skew a bit better. So the characters are written in their voices more often, but overall it didn't go anywhere significant more often as well.
Yeah, absolutely agree. So lastly, Laura gives her predictions for what our top 10 episodes will be in our ranking. So keep these in mind, and folks, you start thinking about what your top episodes are as well, because we'll see how we align.
Yeah.
Maybe can we do one of those tier ranking things? Maybe that could be fun.
That could be fun.
So guesses, Laura's guesses for top 10: Passion, Becoming Part 1 and 2, Surprise, Innocence, The Body, Restless, The Gift, Hush, and Once More with Feeling, rather.
I mean, I'm not gonna spoil anything, but it's not inaccurate.
And lastly, she says, if you guys don't have Where the Wild Things Are near the bottom, I'm coming across the Irish Sea to find you and to have a word. So this episode of the podcast can be entered into evidence if necessary.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Laura.
Thank
you,
Laura. That's lovely.
Message.
We love fun reading that. Okay, next up on the Bronze Banter, mailbag edition. We have a lovely message from Jackie. Jackie, thank you so much for writing in. I'm doing my Fraser Crane voice now on KCL 4000, etc. Hi boys, I'm not a person who writes the podcast hosts, but the plea on your last episode specifically to people who feel that way to actually write in got me. So here it goes. And I love that because I like to know that works. Yeah, I like to know I can manipulate people. I've lived in this is lovely, and I really kind of took a lot from this. I've lived in New York City for the entirety of the pandemic. Nearly everyone has reasons why the start of the pandemic was particularly hard for them. For me, it was a continuation of a difficult breakup in early March 2020, the loss of a rascally but beloved cat, not unlike Booker from the sounds of it, and living alone without my normal access to friends and a support system in the epicenter of the North American first wave. In the fall of 2020, and there's a phrase, a friend and I decided to meet halfway between our respective cities for a week of hiking and relaxing in Eastern Tennessee. So I found myself Googling best Buffy podcast in search of entertainment for the 11-hour drive.
And when she gave up on all that, she found our podcast.
Yeah, she went to the dark web, i.e. page 3 of the Google search results, and there we were. I found your podcast, and having already listened to the other big two Buffy podcasts, download a few episodes to try. A few hours into the drive, I was completely hooked on your combination of serious literary review and critique, humour, and the, in brackets, fond way you make fun of each other. I made a pretty good dent in your episodes, which were out to date on that trip, since I pretty much listened non-stop from NY to Tennessee and back. You were a distraction during a tough time, a connection to my favourite show, where there wasn't much to enjoy about the world, and standing friends where social interactions were hard to come by. It's been a pleasure having you as company these last otherwise largely dreadful couple of years. Also, I grew up with Whippets as pets and share your affinity for sighthounds. I was so happy to hear these strangers half a world away got themselves a greyhound. Enjoy your sleepy giant dog. Wow.
We sure do actually enjoy our sleepy giant dog, in fairness.
That is
lovely in every way.
Yeah, that is an incredible thing to know and to share. And I think for every person who, was so kind to share that with us, and we presume there's a few more people who have kind of taken something from it as well. So that's really, really lovely.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jackie. Okay, next up we have a message which made me laugh a lot. And it's from Liz, not Liz OT of common mention on the podcast, but a new contactee of ours, Liz. I'm not normally a person to reach out, but Joel said it was okay, so lol. Great start. My favourite moment was Joel speaking about Giles coming back in season 6, when he said Giles arrived with powerful white magic. Not to say that in a racist way, but he actually was full of white magics. So I enjoyed that as well. I logged in the last episode when retelling the story of the loud movie guy and his shattered masculinity, then tying it to, or transitioning with speaking of the end of the world, Brian transitions with no Joel speaking of shattered masculinity. I had that thought right as Brian was saying it. You are very funny, yeah. I get to feel like I'm in the room joking with you sometimes when I find myself thinking the same thing. I started listening maybe a year ago. I started a few episodes in, as your first episode suggests. Thank you, Brian. It was great. Great inclusion.
I think I stole that from Gilmore Guys, actually.
Yeah, it works. With the podcast we don't mention, Gilmore Guys, because we stole their name.
We did.
I listened to my favourite Buffy episodes and all the current ones over the last year. I'm in Ohio, USA. Please don't hold that against me at all. Fair. Absolutely fair. Well, listen, when making ceramic art or doing work around the house, I've really enjoyed your take on episodes and will miss the podcast. Thank you for having created it. Wow.
That's really incredibly sweet. Thank you so much. And if you'd like to do ceramic sculptures of the two of us, please just post them over to us whenever you're ready. We have been watching a lot of like Pottery Throwdown recently, which is about ceramics, and that's been fascinating. So I when I heard that, I was like, oh, wonderful.
We know about ceramics. We care.
Yeah.
So next up from Rachel. Hi Joe and Brian. I started my Buffy rewatch journey nearly 3 years ago and was looking for a few podcasts to deepen my enjoyment. My podcast app has trashed my list of subscribed podcasts at least 4 times since then. I always resubscribe to this one,
which is incredibly touching.
At first I didn't know if I could decipher your accents, but now I love them.
Same.
I think one of the secret things I don't, leg out is like there are occasionally times, I'm sure when I'm talking to you, but definitely you're talking to me, where I just be like, say that again. I didn't understand.
Well, along with having like, unusual accents, according to some people, we also do speak incredibly quickly as people just generally. It's something I've been criticized a lot for in my life.
Yeah,
so.
Me too. Absolutely, me too. I listened to Buffy Boys alongside. I can't express a comment on this, but I will read it verbatim. I listened to Buffy Boys alongside Buffering and Dustig, now called Still Pretty, and so I was afraid your relationship was perhaps doomed, but I'm so glad you make it through. I particularly have appreciated your little segments and puns. Every time Booker did something loud, I learned a lot about what it means to look at a text with a literary lens. I'm getting so much vocabulary for thinking about shows and media that impact me. Listening to Buffy Boys has helped me enjoy other stories so much more. I'm currently loving Arcane. I'm really hating the available podcasts on it. Any chance you talk about it or other texts, thanks for the great show. And they've actually signed that May, so Rachel May, and they've signed it May, so thanks May. So yeah, Arcane, a fantastic show. We really enjoy it. We talked a little bit about it here. Some really lovely comments there. I think we're definitely, if we're thinking about doing something in future, which we may do, we may not, we're kind of deciding what we want to do. All that kind of stuff I think is in the mix.
Mm-hmm. And just thank you for saying that, the way we kind of talk about Buffy has helped you kind of understand other texts. That's so mad and cool.
Yeah, and actually both to May and to everyone else is written in. I'll talk a little bit of this at the end of our episode, but a kind of recurring theme is that the people who've been listening are absolutely lovely people.
Yeah, undoubtedly.
And Ghost works. Okay, next via Twitter, again a regular long-time listener of ours, Rich Rogan, succinctly and beautifully, I think you've made one of the best Buffy podcasts. I'll give it 9.5 out of 10. Ulysses references. So
to be honest,
lot to love there.
Yeah, to be honest, like not getting a 10 out of 10 review means more in some ways.
It makes me hungry. It means I have somewhere to go. You know, it works.
Well, like, I mean, do I think that we did a 10 out of 10 podcast? Absolutely fucking not. But like someone like sitting back and evaluating and saying 9.5, you know, where they're like, I have a critical eye on this and I don't think that it's like perfect. That's amazing.
It's very powerful.
It's a very high rating if you're going to be saying it's not perfect.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you, Rich.
Thanks, Rich. Okay, next up we have a lovely message from Joe from San Francisco in the United States of America.
It sounds kind of gay.
San Francisco just has a city, or
just this whole the tenor so far.
Yeah. Oh, the tenor of it is
go ahead.
A little fruity. Congratulations on making it to the end of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Your review of the series from a queer, feminism, literary perspective has been a highlight for me over the last 2 years. I enjoy your insight on the character arcs, themes, and flaws that exist in the series. One of my favourite episodes from Buffy Boys is your analysis of Restless. Both of you seem to greatly enjoy analysing its more unique season finale. It was a pleasure learning new insights on a series I've seen multiple times, which is great. And we love Restless, and we continue to think. I
absolutely adore it.
I want to especially highlight the bronze banter. To start, I appreciate your blunt perspectives on Joss Whedon's behaviour, as well as your support of Chris Carpenter and the rest of the survivors.
Thank you.
It was a nice balance of supporting Buffy the show that was a collective effort beyond Joss Whedon while still rightfully shaming Joss. I also want to highlight your television recommendations. Some of my most recent favourite shows were discovered because of your podcast. The Leftovers, Lovecraft Country, Euphoria, Fleabag, just to name a few. To wrap things up, I listened to the podcast on 1.2 speed, as my usual 1.5 speed was a bit too fast. And yes, people from the United States tend to talk way too slow. The primary time I listened to podcasts was commuting to and from my job. I worked as an intensive care unit nurse during the pandemic. So instead of staying home, my work life actually increased dramatically. Buffy Boys was a great way to decompress and gain new knowledge on a favourite series. Looking forward to final episode rankings and the conclusion of Angel's failed feminist gestures. Best from Joe. Wow.
Thanks so much, Joe. That's incredibly touching.
Yeah.
Just like the idea of like people like, you know, finding comfort in the podcast. I'm just sounding so repetitive now at the moment, but like, you know, it's ridiculously sweet. Thank you so much.
And I know the prevailing sentiment was the best way to support healthcare workers in this time was to stand outside and clap. But we thought maybe we would just do a podcast instead.
Yeah. I think standing outside and clapping was a big thing in the US, was it?
No, it was just the NHS in the UK. Yeah. Okay, next up, and for all you people out there listening on 1.5 speed, this is for you. This whole section, I think, but I think I'm enjoying this so far.
Yeah. We don't do this. We don't
do this very often though. So Katie from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, USA. Dear Brian and Joel, I found your podcast through a post in the Buffy subreddit at some point in 2020. A comment I also love because every little thing here that someone mentions that worked, I'm glad I took the time to do it. Yeah,
yeah, of course.
I've been listening to another Buffy podcast that just wasn't for me, which they have named, but you know, y'all can guess. So I was thrilled when I listened to Buffy Boys for the first time and quickly worked my way through it. I appreciate your love for the show and the characters, and that you don't let that love stand in the way of criticism. Mm-hmm. I also really enjoy the bronze banter and the recommendations on what you're consuming. I learn something new every time I listen to an episode. But as much as I really adore Buffy, it has been a touchstone show for me for over 20 years now, I think what I'm most grateful to you for is your unconditional allyship and feminism. It means a lot and it gives me a lot of hope for the future in these challenging and enraging times. I'm an American, so lots to be challenged and raged about. I can't wait to hear what you'll do next. Thank you for all that you do. Oh,
it's incredibly sweet.
Yeah, really just, you know, again, ironically or appropriately, or whatever you want to say, much like Buffy, I'm kind of left here at the end slightly speechless for all my talking.
Mm-hmm.
Next, so the last written message we have, which I'm going to read out, is from Elizabeth, who has been a regular member of the fan gang, the Buffy Boys Scoobies here, super fangs. You know, you're great writers as well, like some really great turns of phrase here. I just love the economy which Elizabeth starts here. This is Elizabeth from Twitter. I wanted to send you an email to let you know how much I enjoyed the podcast. I started listening to Buffy Boys in autumn 2020, around the time you got to season 5 episode 8, and I caught up by the end of the year. Listening to you two talk about Buffy was a lovely bright spot for me when I was going through my first job hunt after finishing uni, as well as obviously the pandemic. So I'm very grateful to you for that. Though I've dabbled in other Buffy podcasts, yours is the only one I've listened to every episode of because I feel that your analysis really deepens my understanding of the show.
It's incredibly touching.
So nice. You also have an influence on how I view stories in general, in terms of really reinforcing the values of just looking at lore, etc., as it serves the story, and having the confidence to just not care about precisely how much sense it makes, as long as what it actually does is good, which is a really useful lens, which I find very touching because that's something that's very important to me.
Yeah, me too.
My favourite episodes of yours have been Who Are You and The Weight of the World. The Weight of the World was a surprise to me because it's not an episode I really think of as a favourite, but your point about Buffy thinking about killing Dawn as an intrusive thought and the discussion around it was so spot on and illuminating. Who Are You? I hadn't historically been that much of a Faith fan, but I experienced a big conversion in the past year or so when your excellent Faith takes did help to contribute to.
That means a lot.
Yeah. Your point also about how everything Who Are You is trying to do as an episode is directly available to the more casual viewer is a really valuable one, which is fed into some of my Miyagi analysis thinking in other places too. As well as being very insightful, your commentary both on Buffy and Bronze Banter topics is also just great fun. I can't remember who was responsible for it, but removable youth pastor faces out of town is an incredible phrase that has stuck with me.
Which was Joel.
As is the idea of, have you been Jenny Calendars?
Also Joel.
Which we genuinely just say to each other so often around the house.
Yeah.
I think this wasn't on the Buffy Boys Twitter. I might plug it on the Buffy Boys Twitter. Mm-hmm. I did an incredible tweet about about Booker being Jenny Calendar in my office. It was really underappreciated, and I'd love to give it another go around because it's one of my favorite things creatively I've ever done. I'm going to do that. Lastly, from Elizabeth. I'm really glad that you're going to cover Angel Season 5 too, because it would be lovely to get to listen to you for an hour a week longer, for a little longer. Congratulations on getting to the end of Buffy Season 7. I hope you've enjoyed the ride and thank you for sharing it with us. Wow. Again, I'm just repeating myself at this point.
Yeah.
But the idea that, people will be grateful to us for creating this thing, well, I feel like saying thank you for taking the time to listen. It's going to take a lot of thinking.
It's very likely I'll re-listen to this specific part of this episode quite a lot. This is all for us.
Yeah.
Just skip forward if you're not us and don't want to just hear about how great we are. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That's incredibly sweet.
There's not too much I can thank the pandemic for, but getting into Buffy and getting into Buffy Boys was probably one of my highlights. I started getting obsessed with the show as I was watching it on E4 in the UK during lockdown, and then I wanted some added sharp commentary, and I came across the Buffy Boys podcast, and I listen to it every week as I go for my walk through Brockwell Park in Brixton. And it's a moment of just calm and joy and being in touch with a wider fan base, which for some reason makes me feel very at home and gives me a sense of belonging. I think by far my favourite episode is I Only Have Eyes for You, season 2, where Angel and Buffy have a role reversal. And I just love the writing. I love the kind of way it plays with gender roles. I love where they are in their story and how it's all about to crescendo. And so you can imagine I was really excited about listening to the Buffy Boys hot take until I realised they had accidentally recorded it, then deleted it. So they were recording it again, and so they were much grumpier in the second version, which made me laugh a lot. Anyway, thank you for all that you do, Buffy Boys, and for all your time and your research and all of the effort it takes to read every Mark Fields entry, or Mark Field, I don't know which one he is, and for giving us a little insight into your lives and your cultural tastes. And yeah, I'm excited to see all that you go on to do. Oh, and then a final thing. There was one podcast, I can't remember which one exactly, but towards the end of the episode, Joel says to Brian, God, could you imagine if we just had the idea of let's make candles instead of let's make a Buffy rewatch podcast? And I was going through a heavy candle making lockdown obsession phase. So that really made me laugh and I felt very seen. Anyway, all the best to you and thank you.
And what I'll say here is we are now officially reacting to Xena's voice note to us. We listened to it there, And just in terms of like good audio, we are going to drop it in wholesale into this part of the episode. Know that we did laugh.
This is the thing I've seen people do on other podcasts. I think it works. Yeah.
So we did laugh, and I can't believe I can't imagine how much it felt to have been looking forward to I Only Have Eyes for You, which is an incredible episode, one of my favorites. And to find that we have in fact fucked it up so royally that we had to scrap it and re-record it grumpily. I'd imagine that is I'd say it was made for good listening.
Yeah. I often think about that day when I think about how we managed to keep going with this show.
That one day, that definitely didn't happen multiple times, Joel.
I think there was one time that was particularly terrible. I remember standing in an alley outside work on the phone with you being like, what do we do?
Yeah, that was the time that you were deleting the podcast while I was moving it.
Yeah, it was bad news bears entirely.
So you're watching the files delete moment by moment.
Yeah.
Not good. What I think also...
but I have to say, again, Zena is doing a kind of a tremendous... supporter and just
tremendous writer, and also I looked at her Twitter account. She's fucking famous, and
she's a real
has written
person
for really big places and is incredibly intelligent and nuanced in her writing. And I was like, the fuck you should listen to our podcast for. So that's an incredible compliment. So thank you so much, Tina.
As many of our listeners I'm sure are, but for her it's right there on the Twitter page, easy to access.
Yeah, exactly.
So thank you so much for that message.
And I can't imagine how jarring it must be to listen to someone else's voice in this podcast in the final episode.
Yeah,
it's never happened before. It never will again.
We did talk a bit. Well, no, that's not true. We've had one crossover episode. Yeah. And we did talk a couple of times about having guests on for a couple of things, and it just didn't.
We just never did it.
Come together because other people aren't as organized as we are.
Well, not only are people not as organized as we are, we also like when we were like, oh, we'll just do an episode, a bonus episode in this instance. Is like we were wrecked.
Yeah,
we work full-time jobs. We do other things, and Buffy Boys takes up a lot of time.
So this is a thing I used to do a lot, which I finally learned about, which is when I would have a break from something, I'd be like, you know what would give me a break? Instead of doing the thing I do regularly, which I know how to do quickly, I'll do a completely new thing from scratch, and that'll be a change. And then we eventually didn't do that. But I will put it out there. I'm just gonna flow here live on air. Something we talked about before was doing an episode about the Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie. I do think we should do that at some point.
Maybe.
I think it'd be an interesting bit of apocrypha.
Maybe. I'm not committing to that.
Okay, but put it out there. Okay,
so that is the bronze banter, the longest bronze banter, thankfully, and
the bronze is officially closed for renovation.
Yeah. I think it's closed for good now. It's just been
sucked into the hell now. Yeah.
That being said, we will be doing the bronze banter going forward for Angel, I think, right?
Yeah, we'll need
for Angel / Buffy ranking.
We'll need to give it a paint job. It'd be like Wolf from Heart. We need to kind of build a whole new set for it a little bit.
And for listeners, we're planning on titling that whole season 8. Because I think that's kind of funny.
Season 8 of our show.
But do know that we are not covering the comics. It is season 8 of Buffy Boys. It is not season 8 of Buffy.
Yeah, just be clear. Okay, so 1 hour in. Want to talk about the episode?
Yeah, speaking of being speechless.
Absolutely, Brian. Thank you for that transition. So we head into Chosen directly from the previous episode. We have Angel and Buffy conclude their kiss. We have a brief number of interactions there. Why are you here, etc. I don't know. Kiss me. The first goading, Spike, etc. So the first thing I'll pick up, and we'll probably end up doing this slightly kind of out of order because that's how you have to kind of talk about this episode. But much to your point, the interaction that the first has with Spike never comes up again in the episode. No. There's a slight bit of maybe actually a slight disgruntlement that Spike has, but it doesn't even finish it when he kind of comes to it in a couple of scenes. It doesn't finish out the scene. They're like...
No.
So there's purposeless.
Like, so what happens, like the conclusion of that is that Spike's annoyed and draws Angel's face on a punching bag and punches it. Like,
which is funny.
It's funny, but it was a cheap conclusion to the penultimate episode of Buffy.
Yeah.
Which I think is just like stupid. But I think, once that's been written, you have to go with it and figure it out.
So I will say that there's so many parts of this episode that because as I mentioned before, my original watch of Buffy was it was scattershot through season 6 and 7. There was definitely huge parts of second half of season 7 I hadn't seen, and then I watched the finale. So there's parts of this episode that are really stuck in my brain, even though they're not necessarily good, but they're just memorable. And one of it is definitely this whole thing of being in this crypt, of Angel and Buffy being there while she fights Caleb reviving. Caleb kind of giving the send off that he's written to be Hag, where he is just varnishedly sexist and abusive, misogynistic, I'm gonna kill you, you bitch, all this kind of stuff. And then we get a kind of a glory shot so to speak, of we get a beauty shot of her using the Slayer scythe to cut him from his balls to his head, you know. And what I think is very funny is that everyone remembers that this is where she cuts him in half, and that's what happens. But like, you cannot see anything.
No,
like
it's all implied.
It's just about implied. You know what I mean? I do think her bit where she's like, he has to split is funny, and I do appreciate that.
Yeah, it is. And cool. How do you find the interaction between Buffy and Angel in this part?
Necessary.
Yeah.
I think the bit actually inside the crypt is awkward, slightly awkward, because like, this is season 5 Angel, and Angel is a very different character to how he fits into Buffy, and we treat these characters as the same person, the same character, but like, in many ways, like, you're on different shows, you're different production teams, they're not necessarily the same characterization.
100%. And
what we see here is Angel being irritable and funny, and that is kind of his whole characterization on Angel, the TV show. And also Buffy's older and all that kind of stuff, so like, in some ways it doesn't, it's not bad by any sense, but like, I actually think it's a great creative decision to, yes, he absolutely should be here for the final episode, but not to have him in the fight, because it just would have been created.
It wasn't his fight.
It wasn't his fight, and he wouldn't have gelled, and like, it means that she can stick with the Scoobies and the women and all that kind of stuff. So that didn't do a lot for me, although it was nice to see them together, etc.
So I actually disagree. Okay. I think that, like, as a whole, I think this is a very necessary part of the episode, in the sense that, like, you know, there is a little bit of fan services, which is just like, bring Angel back. But what the text is communicating is that Buffy and Angel are together. Like, I mean, not actually together, but they are meant for each other, and they will continue to be meant for each other, and that Buffy's hope for the future is Angel. I think that's an important context for her interactions with Spike. And like, I think it's actually very tender. I think it's actually a very inherent and very important and subtle part of Buffy's journey, is that like, you know, she is never defined by her relationships with men, except for when they insist on it, which is an experience most women face, which is that, like, the men attempt to impose their life onto her, especially Angelus. I think that storyline is actually writing about that rather than an instance of it, if you get me. So Buffy's life is very much defined by her, but the relationship she has with Angel, and the fact that she experienced this deep and very passionate and very important love, and it's not available for her, is both beautiful and also, like, very important. And I think, you know, I think in the scene where she says, like, you know, I don't know, I can't look past this, but if I am, it is with you. You know, like, and she says it very subtly and very, like, kind of like in a roundabout way. But I think that's an important and interesting thing to include in this episode, which is the final Buffy episode, and which is the like, it's the last word on Buffy and relationships, really. You know.
So, I agree entirely. I was in my brain, I was making the distinction between when they're inside and when they're outside the building.
Okay.
So that's it, because I actually think those are two different scenes, essentially. So the inside is the lore, the second front in LA, the meet cute and all that kind of stuff. And I absolutely agree that a scene that I did not remember was the length. It takes a lot of runtime, like, for the episode. A lengthy conversation they have outside, which is quite quiet in many ways. It's quite unbombastic, and I agree with everything you said. I like that part of it. I'm so for, and I think it actually, it felt very satisfying to me in the terms that it really shows, you know, with a lot of her being, she has to be very reactive as a character. And we don't always get a great opportunity to see her interiority that isn't about that, where she's actually planning. This is exactly it, where she's planning her future, she's thinking about her future as opposed to what she has to get done. And seeing here that she understands that everything that's happened to her has happened in an incredibly short number of years when she's quite young, and that maybe, you know, I think it freed her from being defined as the character who can't find love and can't be happy, and her just being like, no, this is like a weird few years I've had, and potentially, if I live, there could be other years after that. And I thought it was really, really hopeful.
I think the single most important shot of this episode is Buffy smiling, looking into the future.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah. And we have, from a mechanical point of view, we have Angel leaving this scene, as is noted, kind of backing into the shadows
as he entered and as he exited Buffy previously.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But yeah, no, I think the episode, kind of like what it's trying to do in many ways, is trying to explore reasons for her to have that smile at the end. So the whole thing is like a contributing various elements that like go into that hopefulness, that genuine hopefulness that she has at the end, between the kind of reconciliation she has with Faith in a large way in the previous episode, the reconciliation she has with Spike ultimately, which is that, like, you know, because I do believe, I do think he's right when he says, no, you don't love me, but thank you. And that being an important moment in terms of her embracing her own shadow self. And then further, like her, the person who asks her, like, you know, what are we doing next? And I can't believe how much ahead I'm skipping, being Dawn.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think all of this contributes to this like ultimate like expression of like the episode, which is, you know, like what next in the most positive, hopeful way. You know? So I think Angel, I think part of that smile is certainly Angel's saying, you know, I do want it to be us in the future, you know?
Yeah, and I think there's an interesting counterpoint to be had that, you know, we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go on, but when we went into the podcast, I very much had the mentality and the perspective that, you know, that was very different, which was that, you know, season 8 in the comics and all that, where not canonical conclusions, the canon was important. And I probably at the time had a little bit more of an idea that Joss is a great person, great writer, feminist,
all the kind of stuff worth reading whatever he did, or
yeah,
you know?
And if he says it's canon, even though I'm like, I think this is bad, but like it must be true, and obviously all that's changed. And so I came to the conclusion of two things. One is that this is the end of Buffy's story. This episode,
this is a finished text,
absolutely. But the show ends with a ellipsis. It ends with, for the first time, the intimation of we'll never know what happens next to Buffy, but that there is a next. Whereas Angel as a show, I think, does end appropriately with you know, an ending. You know,
a sad full stop.
They never leave that alley, and again, I also think that's appropriate for the story. So I think those actually weirdly work together really well.
We also discussed last night, we don't think that Spike getting to LA and recorporealizing, etc., if I could say that word properly, I don't think it's canon for Buffy. I think it's great, right? It's great for Angel, the season 5. I think it contributes positively there. I don't think that's part of this storyline. Yeah,
I think that's I think none of these things are true, because none of it's true. You know, it's all interpretation.
Exactly. The canon, like, you know, what is canonical? You'll never get, like, nothing is canon. The canon is not canon.
Yeah.
You know, all this stuff is like the signifiers, the meaning, the text. All these things are so heavily compromised through time, intention, like faulty mechanisms of reading, writing, etc., that there's no canon here to be had. But for me, the truth of the matter is not that Spike.
Yeah,
it comes back. If I was to write a Spike novel, the ending will be here, because that is the end point of his character. He has sacrificed, and he has found himself capable of becoming a champion.
Yeah. And also that for vampire characters, we've talked a lot about how part of the undeadness of it and part of the tragedy of it is that, you know, a life requires bookending to have completion and meaning.
It's just one we've talked about a lot, but I think we should have.
No, I think we've definitely talked about it. And
especially with Angel, I suppose.
Yeah, that immortality. That's why in many ways it's a curse, because if something has no frame of reference, moments start to mean less. Do you know what I mean?
Wants to live forever.
When love must die. Yeah. And then with Spike, that's why it's not a tragedy that he dies, because what he wants from life, from his life, such as
humanity,
isn't to continue.
Yeah, it's to reestablish his own humanity, and there's nothing more human than dying.
Yeah. So, I think we're in the first scene.
Yeah. So kind of where it goes from there is that, like, essentially Buffy is getting to the point where she has this realization of what she can do. So you have her her and Spike reconciling after this nonsense about Angel. Seeping together, I think, pretty heavily implied.
You think, actually, quick question, do you think sexually?
I know that there's supposed to be like an ambiguity there. I think everything about the text suggests that they are, like, they're intimate with each other And that's the most important thing. It's not like, like what form that intimacy takes. Who knows? But it's I would kind of personally read it as sex. Yeah.
I think I agree, because I think the fact that they had their back and forth. He kind of like brushes her off, as he always has, and complains about something. She starts to walk off, and he gets in front of her. He's like, "Oh no, don't go anywhere. I was just kind of joking." And she's like, in a really like human way, it's like, "Oh, thank God," because I really didn't want to go upstairs and try to find somewhere to sleep. It really communicates that they're at a point where it's no longer these like movements and these statements that can't be taken back.
Yeah.
And in that way, it doesn't matter if they have it's intercourse or not, because they're at that point where it's not about these dramatic moments. Yeah. Which I think is really valuable.
Or the definitional aspects of them. And then Buffy has a visitation from the First, where the First like overplays its hand and says, you are alone, and that is why I'm going to get you. And Buffy believes it and says, okay, well now I know what I'm going to do, and I know we're going to win.
I know I'm going to win, yeah.
And after that, so she has her plan, and Buffy has, the most Buffy perfect speech, I would say, of all the speeches that Buffy gives,
which we don't see at this point of the episode.
Exactly, yeah. But it begins where she is telling the potentials to choose to fight or not, and it obviously concludes towards the end of the episode where she says that like all girls who can stand will, and everyone who has latent power will have it, and enabling all the Slayers of course becoming a larger metaphor for feminism, solidarity, and all that stuff. But we can talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah, but the couple of key messages of speech really, that the big takeaways being, are you ready to choose to be strong?
Yep.
And that's not something that someone has to give you permission to do.
And it's inverting the phrase. It's the whole thing is talking around the concept of choosing and what it is to be chosen. Because Buffy has been chosen to be the loneliest girl in the world, and also the only one with power to change anything, the only one with responsibility. And what she says is like, are you ready to choose yourself? Yeah. So she's she is subverting everything that the Shadow Men did, and everything that the patriarchy has done, and said, I can empower you. Do you choose to do that with me? Yeah,
and I think what plays very well with that is she says, one girl in all the world chosen alone to fight vampires. And when she really kind of articulates, because some old men thousands of years ago, a couple of them decided it was that way. And I think that is, it's very easy to think of the way the world is and the way structures are as derived from something essential. That it is. I think it's a very human thing to think, if something is this way or something is so hard to change, there must be a reason somewhere why.
And it's like, it feels like, if it is this hard to change, it's unchangeable as well, which is obviously something they talk about at the end, is that like they didn't save the world, they changed it, which is a very interesting distinction.
100%. And I think her articulating how arbitrary and how fragile the choice of a few men and the shadow, like I was going to say, well, like literally the shadow play over thousands of years, like the Watchers Council, the men aren't strong. It's all a shell game. It's all trying to distract and really bring it into focus. And what I think pairs,
which is a very Marxist message of like, like seasonally means production, and realizing the strength that the population has in terms of like overthrowing zealots.
And I think rather than any callback, any kind of cute callback to the earlier episodes or the earlier Scooby stuff in this episode, the one most essential and crucial callback is when she outlines her plan to Giles, and he says in that Watcherly tone that what she's suggesting, it flies in the face of everything that we have done to fight evil for untold generations. And he said, I think it's bloody brilliant. And that is kind of, and her, they don't get really as much on as I would like in this episode, but she does say she wants his opinion, and there's that moment of, reconciliation.
I think Giles, unfortunately, is by far the most underserved character in the season, and it's a season that's sparse on character growth for most of them who aren't potentials. But I do think that I do think it's lacking in Giles content, and I think the finale, one of my major notes walking away was, gosh, would have loved to have seen more Giles.
Absolutely, no, I agree with that. But I think in terms of what that is there, like the most fundamental relationship is that although they have such a supportive relationship, he is a representation of the problem in many ways.
Yep.
And she has so fully, like, very little way emasculated him by saying, I don't need you, I don't need your knowledge. Your knowledge is actually unhelpful at certain points. And when they reconcile, him being like, no, I'm ready for you to tell me where to go. Like, that is important, I think.
It's important, but also I think that she also like it's an important relationship in the sense that like they do fully trust each other and they do fully they respect each other. You know,
Yeah.
Giles has come to represent the problem, and that's actually a very nuanced like portrayal of like men and feminism, where it's like you do have to acknowledge the inherent biases you have and the inherent privilege you have and the potential mistakes you've made, and say okay and listen to the people around you and move forward from there and not wallow. And that's kind of like what Giles in this episode is kind of representing to some degree, is like, yes, Giles is part of that organization which enslaved and, you know, controlled women, and he benefited from it, and he was also a victim of it. His family being watchers were abusive by all accounts.
Yeah.
And what he can do now is he can like, you know, help the women around him specifically, and also contribute, not hold back from contributing his knowledge at the same time, you know, and his opinions, you know.
Yeah. So the plan that Buffy pitches, and which we only see unfold later on in terms of context, but they go in with this in mind, is that they're going to go together to the school. They're going to enter the Hellmouth. Willow is going to be entrusted to use the Slayer scythe to activate every Slayer in the world, and every Slayer in Sunnydale.
Every potential in the world to be a Slayer.
Yeah, every girl that can be a Slayer will be a Slayer, and that
it's not vague if it is specifically potentials, but I think it is specifically potential for this. I think we can take it writ a bit more large, though, in terms of metaphorical implications, which is not that it's not just there are loads of chosen. It's that women are empowered more generally.
Yeah, and I think that's a very astute point, and I think what that pairs with is the fact that Dawn doesn't have to be a Slayer to be part of that movement. You know, she's not a potential.
Well, I actually want to talk about that, because Dawn, I think, is a very important forerunner in this moment, where Buffy is like, you know, empowering all the people around her and giving selflessly of her own power, because giving power increases power. Dawn enabled that in Amanda in the episode Potential.
I think it's just called Potential,
yeah. So where Dawn does enable and support Amanda in becoming more herself and more like stronger. I think that's very much a precursor for what Buffy's done in this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. So if there are, you know, thousands of Slayers activated around the world, then that shifts the balance of power for all women and all people in that position. So it's not really about who has the muscles, so to speak. You know,
I think it's probably not worth like harboring on for too long. But like this solution, like, you know, it's beautiful in so many ways. It's also beautiful in the context of the season in which Buffy has leaned into isolation and leaned into exceptionalism. Which is like, you know, replacing a hegemonic and patriarchal structure with an equally flawed one with one person at the core, rather than this more democratic, more socialist conclusion to the season. Which I think we talked about it extensively before, but I do think it's a very neat and very good communication of it.
No, I agree, and I think it's worth bearing in mind that, you know, we're not saying that, you know, what's written here has never been written before, you know, and again, we're trying to avoid the myth of the auteur here, but in terms of the other options, like what a show would do probably more traditionally was she would find a power source that would make her more powerful.
Yep.
And you could spin that every way you want, but that she would draw on the ancient power of the Slayer and go Super Saiyan and basically like fight a big monster or something. Like, that's kind of how these things traditionally end. Yeah.
I think that a lot of this has its precursor again in the end of season 3, Graduation Day, where Buffy, like as a response, enables everyone around her and says, we are all fighting, we are all afraid, but we are not lying down, and we all know that this is scary and something bad is happening, but what we can do here is stand together in solidarity.
And I think it's actually it makes this with the conclusion of this season 3. This makes the conclusion of season 5, because this is a death for Buffy in some ways. It's a death of who she was. It's a death of her.
It's what season 5 offered Buffy was rest in a false way. It was like, not in a false way. I think it was a conclusion. I think the season 5 conclusion tension with the rest of the show, where they were like killed off a character because the show was ending to some degree, and just the confusion there. I think this is a rest in a very mature way. This is Buffy having finally confronted herself, because the first very much is Buffy. You know, I think it's most widely represented as Buffy through the season, and her isolation and her sadness, and the final thing standing in the way of her becoming who she is and feeling part of a community. This rest that she experiences here, where she no longer has to be the person who saves everyone, as in, like, I can't remember what the Cassie episode was called, but her in that episode, Helpless?
Helpless sounds right.
Selfless. So I think it might be just help. Something to do with help. But that episode, her problem was, like, how do I save everyone? I can't just, like, let people die. In lessons, she was like, there are people like taunting her for having those ghosts were taunting her for not having saved them. And then she, like, and her issue around, like, she fucked up to some degree with, like, her comment, like, her commanding a battalion, and so does Faith. And this is a solution for that, which is that, like, she learns to trust and enable the people around her with her own power, and it works.
So beyond that, what I think one of the things we could speak about is, we've talked about how, and I think Elizabeth mentioned in the Bronze Banker section, but kind of sometimes ignoring the sense as long as it works. And this plan does not make sense.
100%. Like, why do they go into the Hellmate before Willow empowers them?
Yeah, so exactly. So
I don't care.
There's no reason to go down first. But also, one of the key, like, literally the MacGuffin of this episode is that Angel has an amulet that a champion conveniently with a soul but Morgan Newman should wear. And it can't be him, so who might it be? And this is going to be helpful in the end in some way. It's brazen. It's kind of fascinatingly brazen. And that is, like, while they manage to fight the Turok handily by the end, the way they win is with the amulet, and they don't know it's going to do anything.
No, 100%.
It's not part of the conversation.
Like, the plan there is actually for them to go beat all these thousands of Turok, which, that's a bad plan, and I don't give a shit.
Yeah. So as a plan, and actually, I was like, how is this going to hold up? And it's very, like, we need these two characters to please stand in this scene over here, and we need these two characters, and it's all so deliberate. And god damn it, it worked for me. I was kind of, I
mean, like, season 3, the conclusion that she blows the fuck out of the school, like, it's the same thing. Yeah. It's great.
So I think in terms of, we have a lot of that kind of, it's the final day kind of stuff. Actually, funnily, I noticed that one of the international titles for the episode is The End of Time Part 2, which is actually the name of the last episode of David Tennant's Doctor Who as well. That's funny, yeah. So it's the dawn of the final day. They go to the school, and it all works quite well in the sense that I said this to you, that I thought that the bit where Willow empowers the Slayers happened in the house, and then kind of they have to run to the school at the side. But obviously that's not what happens.
She's in the principal's office. Yeah.
And you have Giles and Robin have very perfunctory fighting duties to do, and we have Andrew and Anya together, which is worth talking about. I think Xander and Dong are also holding a different corridor. So both the first and third of those pairings kind of really do nothing. They're just there to be there, Giles being able to, like, fight off Turok vampires and all that kind of stuff is so silly.
It's silly, but I like it.
And then we have, I suppose, the more significant movements here are Anya and Andrew together, and Andrew, in a character moment, was actually, I think, fairly earned and fairly believable in his own nerdy way, accepting the fact that he is going to die here and that he's going to die doing something that is actually worthwhile. So yeah, I think for Andrew, I think my question with season 7 would be, will he get there for me as a character? And like this, I think this works for me.
Yeah, I think Tom Link brings a lot of warmth and a lot of, like, humor to the character, which I really appreciate.
He's great. So maybe let's zero in on that a little bit. So how do you feel about the Anya death in this episode?
I actually think, okay, first off, I have no qualms with it. I think it was well handled. I believe Emma Caulfield, apart from anything else, absolutely wanted out of his contract. She's having contract disputes with UPS, no, whatever it is, UPN, who were carrying Buffy at the time. And so Emma Caulfield wanted out. I found, like, I wept. I was sitting there stifling back the tears, watching Anya bravely go, like, she doesn't go to save Andrew, she doesn't get to save Andrew, but I think she's intending to some degree, and also she would, and she's also fighting. She is doing something deeply selfless while she dies. Her last
actual moment saying, bunnies, I'm going to kill these bunnies, is so poignant, you know. And I did not remember that she gets fully cut in half.
She
Like,
really
it is
does.
so brutal.
It's vicious. And the moment of Xander, like, I mean, I think the Xander-Anya relationship, I don't believe they would have made it. I don't think they were really intended for each other in lots of ways. I think Anya is too good for him. I do think that the moment of him wandering the halls trying to find her,
And so close to her,
is like heartbreaking. It's actually I think it's my most remembered image from this episode. And just Anya, I fucking love her. I love that character so much. I have so much appreciation for her. When she comes into the show, she contributes. I think truth tellers are so important in storytelling, and I think she contributes humor, warmth, and also I think maybe the most emotionally astute performance of anyone who's not Buffy in the whole show is her responding to the Joyce situation in the body, where she just breaks down as someone who can't understand what's going on. I think so I found that very upsetting personally. And
I do think that there is, I think I've always appreciated the value that sometimes people die heroically and sometimes they just die, and that's kind of I think that works for me. It is it's a very
Whedon-y thing to write,
of course,
but thankfully it was before it became overplayed. Someone has to die. I think this is done senselessly and in a moment of war,
but intentionally.
And I think it's in the context of the rest of the Buffy show, in which the other three major character deaths of main characters, Jenny Calendar, Joyce, and Tara are all women. I suppose it's a majority women cast, but still,
I think that is the trade-off sometimes.
But all of them are. I think they're all handled equally. Well, no, they're not handled equally well. Tara's isn't. I think they're all handled with different.
They're all
contexts.
handled intentionally.
Exactly.
Whereas I think Game of Thrones in particular, but I think modern culture has ruined us for the idea of let's just kill people who are great actors and incredibly highly paid and long-term characters and all that kind of stuff. Whereas that wasn't the case when this aired.
And I thought it was well tempered and interesting. And I do think that Andrew has at this point he is and especially I think it's in some ways not the most nuanced take, but having him lie to Xander to say she died to save my life and she's so brave and she's so wonderful is I think that's an interesting character moment. I think it's a good development for the character. I think it's a good conclusion to his storytelling ways. I agree. I think in terms of the other core cast, obviously the four Scoobies have their little moment in the hall where they recreate the conversation from Welcome to the Hellmouth, where they're saying the Earth is definitely the harvest.
Pardon me. Sorry, the harvest. I think I was in my head. I was like, it's Welcome to the Hellmouth part 2, but that's not true. Mm-hmm. Where they recreate their conversation from the end of that. It was a little tin-eared, I think.
Yeah,
but I think it was because they're trying to sound like season 1, etc. But I appreciate the point of it. And the production notes being that when they peel off from Buffy, they peel off in the
reverse order that she met them for the first time.
All that kind of stuff. I think we've covered everything Giles does in this episode. He's not super present.
Willow in this episode, I think this is actually a beautiful conclusion to her arc.
She's a really important part of this.
So one of the things that's kind of overlooked by the episode because of the time struggles of it, because it doesn't have a lot of time to do a lot in this episode. But what her conclusion is that she, in doing magic, which is incredibly selfless and in no way an act of retaliation or revenge or selfishness, which is the direction her magic was going for quite a long time, in an act of pure selflessness where she's aware that she might be sacrificing herself, and she's told Kennedy to kill her if she turns dark again, she becomes White Willow, which is, I think, an equally important reaction as Dark Willow is, where she has become selfless and good in empowering everyone. I think it's a beautiful moment. I think it's really important.
I think without that, you run the risk of saying, if women have too much power, they turn evil. I know that's not what it gets to with Dark Willow, but you do need to counterpoint it with that. And Giles, I think it's very important that Giles is actually no. In this episode and previous episodes, he's no, you can do this. You have done a lot of work. If you didn't have that, I think it would be too short. But again, I kind of I probably saw Willow more as a sidekick going into the show, and now I'm no, her storyline is hand in hand with Buffy. And the fact that in that speech Buffy says, Willow is more powerful than all the Shadow Men put together, it's it's absolutely true. Because she draws from something real. Then
I suppose the last I suppose point to really engage with there is then Spike's conclusion. Which, as I said earlier, I do believe him. I do think he's right when, I do think he is doing something deeply selfless when he is in this moment sacrificing himself. I do also believe that he is right that Buffy doesn't love him. I think that's as two people who have traumatized each other, obviously not to the same degree in any way, but who have been
deeply dysfunctional relationship,
looking at each other and saying goodbye and thank you, is interesting and nuanced, and I think it's a great send off to the Spike character.
Yeah, I think him recognizing and again kind of using his more quiet voice rather than his dramatic voice,
and calling Buffy Lamb, which is like very Christian sacrifice, godlike imagery, or Christ-like imagery. That
conclusion, and even from the whole fight, right? Maybe if we just get to Spike through the fight a little bit, they have the fight. It's going badly. We see many potentials killed. I actually think, given when you actually look at their fighting, the actors are choreographed in actually quite a small area.
Yeah, and I think choreography throughout this episode is quite good.
Yeah, so I think within that they actually managed to make it look like a big battle, even though
they're very Lord of the Rings.
Yes, they're relying on the CGI of the pit to make it look like. Actually, I think all worked pretty okay.
Yeah, I have no major issues with it.
And then Buffy gets, we see some potentials cut down and killed. Amanda,
heartbreaking. I had a little cry over that too because I'm a fucking baby.
And then again, I was, for the first time in years, I was watching this episode. I was like, this is currently happening. It was live.
Yeah, I totally agree.
We're in the pit and Buffy is stabbed brutally, and a moment which was not in my active memory for this episode was her being like handing the scythe to Faith and saying, hold the line.
Yeah.
And I'm actually emotional now saying it. Like, I think that's such an important part of this scene, that the whole thing she comes to with Faith, and Faith also having to give up her uniqueness as an active Slayer, and handing it over, and Buffy just entirely just being like, communicating wordlessly to Faith, what has to happen here, you have to now do this.
Yeah.
And Faith taking it and going is so powerful. And then the moment where the first taunts Buffy, you should just never taunt Buffy, because it just makes her more powerful.
It's not my favorite pun of ever of Buffy's either, but it is good where she says, get out of my face.
She was bleeding out, to be fair.
Get out of my face, i.e. stop looking like me.
I don't think I got that as a pun for years. I'm going to admit that now.
Okay.
It's very good. But then she stands, the music rallies. I realise it's actually the music from our DVD menus for this season.
It truly is.
And Rona, I think, throws the scythe to Buffy, and she takes it and knocks 6 to her Kong into the pit. Like, it was great. I was like, this is wonderful. This is a fight. Yeah. This is Avengers Assemble kind of stuff. Yeah.
But I do think the Faith stuff is wonderful there. But yeah, Buffy doesn't give up because Buffy's our hero. I love her.
Yeah, me too.
I really love her
too.
I think Buffy's my favorite character in any TV show. I think
I can see that.
Which is really funny because I remember for years thinking, God, Buffy's kind of boring as a main character because she just kind of does the right thing. And what an unnuanced take.
Yeah.
Buffy is incredibly well written, precisely because she always wants to do the right thing and really struggles to find what it is. And being stalwart and true is a good basis.
It's not the default. It takes work.
It's not the default, and it's an interesting way to do character writing because it's not you don't have your kind of Frodo who is tempted by the dark side or Luke. You don't have your people who just kind of skate by endlessly, easily. Buffy struggles, and
she learns.
And she learns, and she is just deeply human throughout. Anyway,
so through the fight, we had the rally moment, and all the Slayers were activated. They kick ass, and I love that. Really, if you think about if you write down on paper in terms of how people's last moments are in this show, it doesn't seem like it should come together, because the last moment the first has as the protagonist and the enemy is just a moment of doubt.
Yeah.
And then you kind of don't see anything after that. There's no moment where it first goes rawr and kind of burns up or anything. That's kind of it. You see it realizing.
It's
metaphorical, absolutely. And then Spike's amulet of exposition activates, and I actually think this is kind of a cool, neat way to bring it together. Rather than being anything mystical as such, he does, I think, as the Buffy and Summary noted, he becomes a lens for sunlight. Because, of course, what a neat way for a vampire to destroy other vampires is to become the sun.
Yeah, and I've read so much. Rhonda Wilcox writes extensively about Spike and his relationship with light. He's searching for a word that means effulgent. His the painful bright light that he experiences so often.
Every time he just walks around the sun with a hat on.
So true. And then, like, you know, I think in this moment that really reflects Buffy's sacrifice into the energy ball in season 5.
You make it sound so like
stupid. Yeah. When you actually say these things, they sound pretty stupid. But
also another, she bleeds to open, obviously blood opens that rift, and what we didn't mention is to open the seal, all the Slayers stand around and share their blood.
Solidarity.
Yeah.
Loads of little moments of like,
and reuse the same CGI shot of the seal opening. So Spike immolates. And I think that this thing where the amulet sustaining him long enough to basically like burn through the cavern, he catches fire. She holds his hand while it's on fire. He says, you know,
his hand catches fire because they hold hands.
Yeah, because they hold out in the light.
Very reminiscent of a lot of the imagery from Once More with Feeling. Like, you know.
Yes, 100%. And then
what is it? I hold something, but it burns. You know the lyrics for that. You know. But it freezes me.
Yeah, it's like I hold a candle for you and it burns or something.
Yeah.
And then she goes, and then his last thing is that he says, "I want to see how it ends," and painfully slowly he burns.
Turns into a skeleton and everything.
Yeah, it dusks. I think it's very evocative. I've written back like stories that have cribbed that same sacrifice scene. Do you know what I mean? It works. I don't know if it has a message, but I don't know if it teaches us anything. But is it a good ending for that character? Like, yeah. And I think he's come very difficult steps, but like so far from the character he was in season 2 that that's a character that has a lot of work put into it.
100%. And then so I suppose what we then get towards in the end is Buffy does escape, and
incredibly like long you pointed out that they pull off in the school bus with all the survivors and no one seems to ask where Buffy is. If they did, it was very brief. And she escapes
running across the rooftops.
In maybe not the best CGI in the episode. Once again, I noted in very impractical shoes. And we see the entirety of Sunnydale, California collapsing into the pit. And she races out of town. The people are kind of. Does someone die on the bus?
No.
Or we have a fake out where we think Robin has died. And then they get out of town and they pull, and of course, inevitably, as they pull to a stop, the sign that says "Welcome to Sunnydale" falls into the pit.
All 3 times because of Spike.
Because of Spike, yeah. And then that's it. And then we're into the denouement.
Yeah. And I don't think this conclusion could have necessarily been written better. I think this final scene is perfect because someone says, "What happened here? What happened? Why did it all collapse?" And Buffy says, "Spike," and that's Buffy's final word. And it's Buffy's final thing. And it's not a significant thing for Buffy to say. But what I do think is significant is Buffy, in this final scene, not speaking. Not because she is... So, as we talked about a lot through this podcast, Buffy speak is an incredibly important, inherent ability for her. She's able to talk her way through things. She uses speech as, like youth speak, as a guard against the adults who are attacking her. She uses her, when she loses it, in moments like when the Master has killed her for the first time, where she cannot properly quip, that's incredibly important. And she gains it back, and throughout, whenever we see that Buffy has gone silent, it's very, very important. It's very important communication and imagery, and it's usually communicating powerlessness. In this moment, it's flipped on its head in a very beautiful way, where Buffy, in this last scene, does not speak. And what that communicates is that she no longer needs this protection. She no longer needs to be protected against these adults. She no longer needs to be protected against the monsters. Everything that the monsters throughout the show have represented, which is, rape, for sure. It is, sexism. Powerlessness, attack,
unknown threat.
The unknown threat, all these things. Buffy no longer needs protection from that through this speech. So Buffy standing there and just listening while everyone else is saying, what do we do now? And I as we were saying, it is very significant that Dawn says, what's next? And Buffy simply smiling into the future. It's fucking beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm getting emotional.
It works so well. Dawn mentions how they could sleep for a week if they wanted to, and she asks Buffy what's next, and Buffy doesn't know the answer, but she knows that there will be one, and that she has time to think about it, you know. And I do think it's as much as it's a joke, I do think it's nice when Jaws mentions, you know, Hellmouth in Cleveland, because it's important to not be like, this is all, because the
Evil's finished.
Evil's finished, and the first evil is not defeated, it's just retreated, you know. But what the first says in this episode, which I thought was an interesting note of motivation, is it says that when its armies overrun normals on the earth, it will be made manifest.
Yeah.
And so it's about the tide.
Yeah.
And it's about moving the tide back. And that's where we end with. And it is, as I say, as a conclusion for Buffy Summers, you know that she's going to...
This episode gives Buffy the gift of a life.
Yeah, she's going to be okay. And that's it, yeah.
I mean, the reality is that, like, if you were writing on the Buffy forums for all this time period, your thought that it was probably like the natural conclusion of Buffy Vampire Slayer is Buffy's death.
Yeah.
You know, and it has to be Buffy's death. And no, it doesn't. You know, because it's important to write against these things sometimes. Yeah. And the open-ended Buffy smiling into the sunset and feeling like I can live now for the first time, maybe. It's really, really important.
I agree.
Yeah. Okay. Should we move into the bronze banter? No, the other one. Should we move into the dusting?
You're all akimbo. You're all akimbo. Yeah, dusting.
Okay, here's some Buffy bits for you. So Joss Whedon told a Chicago convention in 2004 that he wanted to give Buffy a life-altering wish in this episode, in which that would be to bring Tara back, but Amber Benson wasn't available. IMDb, in its like trivia section, notes that fans do not believe this. Which I find very funny. Yeah. I find that very funny. I also don't believe it. The red cape that Andrew wears is Buffy's Fear Itself costume, which is cool.
During their D&D scene.
Wood is the only principal to survive his tenure at Sunnydale High. David Boreanaz apparently was only available for 7 hours of filming, which is crazy. And he also just didn't want to come back to do this because he felt that, like, you know, reunions for finales is kind of weak. I think it works though, thankfully. Awfully, the WB had announced a week before this that Spike was going to be coming to Angel season 5 as a main character.
Petty.
Which is petty and really takes away from this. And this episode was nominated for an Emmy for Best Visual Effects, and was also nominated for a Hugo for Best Dramatic Presentation. I also would note that this is 100 episodes since Amends, where Angel was first trying to make the first was trying to make Angel kill himself. So it's 100 episodes since the first was introduced, which is really interesting.
More like the last, eh?
Yeah, more like the last indeed. I do like when Buffy is imagining Angel and Spike oil wrestling. I also imagine that for that moment.
One of my Buffy bits is also that Angel says, I know Spike was here, I can remember his scent. And I know what he means, but I don't think he's coming across as he intends to there.
No, he really isn't. And yeah, I would just say that, like, throughout, the visual effects and the combat are genuinely very good. I also quite like the humorous note of Giles and everyone looks like they're planning their like attack, and instead they're playing D&D. Really nice. And I do think that was apparently Amanda was specifically included in that scene to make her death more impactful.
Yeah, also because nerds, they're funny.
Yeah. Joel, do you have any Buffy bits?
Yeah, so a couple of nice turns of phrase and kind of details to tuck away. One was Angel saying he's coming back, he's obviously not going to save the damsel in distress, and Buffy be like, I'm not much for the damseling, which is kind of, obviously a capsule of what the show was about. Obvious trite but enjoyable bit where Caleb is like, you can't defeat me, you don't have the balls, and then,
he doesn't actually get to word
what
the
he's
balls.
saying, Brian, thank you. And then she cocks the balls off. Buffy's saying that she's not done baking yet, and one day hopefully she'll be ready for someone to eat her.
Yeah,
like, do we need to? But I did like her saying that it might be years, if ever, until she's ready to settle down, but she does think sometimes that maybe Angel will be there. And yeah, I think in terms of this being the actual final text for Buffy, that maybe they do end up together. Do you know what I mean?
That's what I believe.
Yeah, I think it works.
Even though Angel definitely dies in like 22 episodes time.
Yeah, but who hasn't died a couple of times in this universe? Yeah. I enjoy Dawn referring to herself as Watcher Junior. So in my mind, I think that's very much part of where Dawn's characterization ends up. You know, that she is kind of the junior Watcher, which I actually quite like for her.
Michelle Trachtenberg, so good,
wonderful. Buffy saying that during the speech, I hate that there's evil in the world and I was chosen to fight it. I think it's just a really interesting thing to know about her. You know? There's a whole thing. Faith and Wood also have a moment in this, but I don't think it really has any great significance. But I did note that it made me think that potentials in theory, because it's mystical, can be any kind of girl anywhere, and yet a lot of them tend to be the general shape and disposition of Buffy, you know.
There was one large girl who was like activated in that like sequence, and I was like, good, but why not show any of the potentials in that room as being larger? Or
they have diversity in that flash forward sequence, but not really in the composition as much, not a huge amount in the composition of the potentials. And also the potentials characterization kind of really didn't go anywhere either. Ultimately they got a little bit, so that it's really so in the final scene when we see faces to latch onto, but like Rona is like a character kind of sputters out after a while and all that kind of stuff. At one point Willow says, Kennedy's saying how Buffy believes in Willow and all that, and Willow says, Buffy, sweet girl, not that bright, which just really made me laugh. And that's it. And then Willow was a goddess at the end, and that's kind of all I have.
Wonderful. I also want to know where the Turcan got that sword that they stabbed Buffy with.
Yeah, like not, you wouldn't think
they're not swordy boys.
Vamps is big sword boys, no. And it's also kind of Harbingers there somewhere, but they kind of get really only a slight look in. Yeah,
so true. Okay, do you have any? Oh, sorry, I'll give you some fashion notes,
please.
So I think that Sarah Michelle Gellar looked beautiful throughout. I didn't love her top. That was kind of like a blouse, like with a bib sewn onto it in the conclusion. But I thought she looked beautiful throughout. I loved Giles in a grey hoodie. That was incredible. Very big fan of that. Faith has a beautiful red tank top on, which I think is very, very Faith and very appropriate for her. Xander's like check shirt and eye patch look. It's actually a pretty good look. I think it's a good one to like settle on for him. And then my last fashion note is just, Willow looks pretty great as she looks like an elder lesbian, which is really nice.
She does, yeah.
Would you have any fashion notes, Joe?
No, I kind of actually agree point of view on that. I think that this is my final image of my mind of who these characters are. Yeah. How they're standing at the edge of Sunnydale, how Xander looks and all that. I thought Tom Lenk in the red cape was very fashionable. Yeah. And yeah, I think that final, again, kind of committing to Buffy a little bit older, but wearing a very feminine outfit while she's kind of, doing this kind of final bit of superheroing, I think is very appropriate. Yeah,
I totally agree. Okay, do you have a death count for us?
Gosh. So in this episode, the deaths, Caleb bisected by Buffy with the M glot, many Turkons, so Dustig or beheaded variously, 1 by Amanda, 3 by Vi, 1 by Buffy, 4 by Buffy specifically with the scythe, 1 beheaded by Giles, 2 by Anya, 1 snapped by Spike, 3 Turkons dusted or cut in 2 by Faith with the scythe, 3 burned by the sun by Dawn. Oh, when she opens the trap, 1 harbinger of death killed by Giles with a sword. 2 Turok dusted by Rona with the scythe. Amanda neck snapped by Turok. Several potential sailors killed by Turok. The remaining hundreds of Turokons all burned with a pure light by Spike. 1 harbinger of death killed by Andrew with a sword. Did I mention Anya? I think Anya Jenkins cut in 2 by a harbinger of death. Spike himself burned by sunlight. The town of Sunnydale collapsed by Spike, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer television show concluded.
Wow, okay. Jill, do you have a rating for me?
I think it's a really difficult episode to rate.
I agree.
In many ways, because I definitely started it lower because it's not
perfect,
well-made episode of television in some ways, but it is in other ways, and it's also a good conclusion. But it's also like we know there are problems with it. Yeah. And it also has the job of concluding the whole show, which I think is a thing a season finale has to do, a series finale has to do. Yeah. So I've settled on 9.2.
Oh wow, okay.
I've decided I'm quite low.
Yeah, it's much lower than I thought.
I brought it down for a couple of reasons, and this is going to come into a couple of the other reasons I have. I don't disliking
9.2 what? 9.2 what?
9.2 Slayers out of 10.
Okay, cool.
9.2 Slayers out of 10. And the reason why, there are objectively issues with this episode. Yeah. As much as it works,
it's rushed.
It's rushed, exactly. It's rushed. There's some plot holes in it. There's some lore inconsistencies in it. There's some really rushed and occasionally missing characterization, and it feels it's very much shows its production on its sleeve. And I think I think it's also if this wasn't the conclusion of, if you take out the really good scenes, right, the speech and what it means for the show and where Buffy ends up and the conversation with Angel. If this was just a season finale, which in some ways it is, it's pulling double duty, it's definitely one of the weaker season finales.
Yes, for sure.
So I take marks off for that. But in watching it, I went into it being like, yeah, okay, we'll watch shows and we'll talk about it. And
it's the most alive I've felt watching Buffy in a while.
Yeah, and I couldn't. It absolutely had to be in the 9 or above for me, because it's like, this is one of my favorite. I'll put it this way: this is one of my favorite finales of any television show.
Me too. I've been thinking a lot about this recently. Yeah,
and it means a lot to me. It meant a lot to me. And to be honest, where this show ends up and what this show says and what this episode says and what it contributes was a big part of the reason for why I wanted to do this podcast and why I thought it was worth talking about. And I hoped, I feared, that when you get to it through 7 seasons of rewatching, maybe it wouldn't mean the same thing anymore. And I think it actually means more than it did when I started. So it's an imperfect scoring, but I'm going to say 9.2.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to go 9.6. Would you believe? So 9.6 Buffy Boys out of 10. I thought that the episode itself, as you said, definitely flawed, definitely had problems. Some of the characterization is bad. Some of the focus is like too much on the Spike Buffy stuff. Caleb being there unnecessarily, all that kind of stuff. I think the emotional truth of some of the stuff it's communicating, the conclusion, the power that has, and the way it leaves it. And I think the actual moment-to-moment final scene, as I was saying, I think it is actually brilliant, genuinely brilliant. I think it could have done a more heightened finale for sure. In some ways, it didn't. Do I mark it down because of that? Maybe. But I think 9.6 I'm comfortable with. And yeah, I really love this episode, actually. And I really love this fucking TV show.
Yeah, I think it's entirely appropriate. 9.6 Buffy Boys out of 10 for you.
Okay. Should we move on to our season wrap-up?
Yeah, so we're into the home stretch now for this episode, but we are going to do a wrap-up for season 7 of Buffy.
Great. Okay. Do you have your notes written down?
I do.
Okay. What did you give the season out of 10? I can't remember if we do this a qualifier or not. I just have a number written down, but I can do a qualifier if needed.
I just have a number written down as well, but we probably should do a qualifier.
Okay. Go on, do your qualifier.
I am going to give I'm going to do this as a season 7 potentials out of 10.
Great. Tell me more about that.
Kind of much of the same conversation in that you could stretch out from the finale episode. I love so much of the concepts of this season. I think it has loads of really valuable and interesting moments. I think that some of the characterization in some places is as strong as it's ever been. And I think it sheds a lot of the things I didn't necessarily like about season 6, which is a benefit. But as a whole, it is a very work-a-day season. It's like, this episode needs to do this and we need to be there, and this character isn't here because this person can only do 7 hours of this, etc. So you can really see the joyings of it.
You really see the fatigue. The
fatigue, absolutely. I think season 8 of Buffy could potentially have been very bad, if they had have continued after this.
Agreed.
So I'm kind of glad of that. So I enjoy watching it. I don't think a lot of the episodes are really meaningful in and of themselves.
Yeah. While having individual, well-written elements.
Yes, some of the episodes are quite bad. And also, it is the season of Buffy I'd be least likely, absolutely, to put on casually or again, even though even with the recency bias. So I think a qualifying 7. Like, this is not a bad season of Buffy, and it does a lot of things well, and I have a lot of nostalgia for it, but it is it's not brilliant by any means. Yeah.
Gotcha. So I'm going for 6 champions out of 10. And that's 6 champions. Yeah, I'd agree with everything you said there. I think it's meandering. I think if it had just kind of picked a direction and really committed to it, especially the direction they were communicating at the beginning of the season, it would have been really strong. It didn't get there. It has wonderful moments. But yeah, ultimately, I would say, the worst season of Buffy. And like the least fun of any season of Buffy as well, which is a real big shame. But I do think, something had to be the worst season of Buffy. It's okay that it's this one. And that's my thoughts on it. Joe, what was your favorite episode?
Yeah, favorite episode, kind of an obvious one. I think maybe Conversations with Dead People.
Yeah, totally reasonable.
I probably would have been tempted to go in to say potentially this episode, because I do really like Chosen, but like Conversation with Dead People, you lift that out, it's just a good episode of Buffy, and it's an episode of Buffy, a kind of Buffy we don't see again in the season really after that. There's the similar stuff, like some of the stuff about the killer in me and that kind of stuff. Like some of that stuff is kind of reaching for it, but in terms of that kind of real character study stuff, but Conversation with Dead People is just a fun watch.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking, potentially Chosen, that definitely like registered for me. Lessons, the opening episode, I actually have a real soft spot for that episode. I think it's really good. I was also thinking Storyteller, obviously a wonderful episode. I nearly settled on Selfless because I think it's actually a genuinely wonderful episode. It talks a lot about what this show has to say. It has genuine horror. It's a deep look into Anya as a character. It breaks format, which I love. I love format breaking episodes. With her singing in it, and just like as a general exploration, I find it very fascinating. I also went for a Conversation with Dead People in terms of my favorite episode of the season. It's an exemplary episode of Buffy. I think it might be in the top 10 Buffy episodes. No, it probably isn't, but it might be in the top. It'll definitely be in the top 20.
I agree with all those kind of also rounds as well. I think Storyteller in particularly is kind of the event episode in some ways, or the format, the concept episode of the season works really well. And Selfless wasn't the first thing that came to mind, but like it's an essential part of the Anya Jenkins canon.
100%. What was your least favorite episode?
First Date.
Okay.
It's just like in a season which is struggling to find its feet in many ways and struggling to keep up momentum. It's just such a crash down from that. It serves to actively reduce the tension of both the Robin character, of the seal of Danzelthar, of all that kind of stuff. It makes them really rote. It also has two tangents. It has like tangents for like the Robin Buffy stuff, which it doesn't do anything, and the entire situation of Xander being seduced by Ashanti is like really, even for the show, is implausible. I think it's a clunker of an episode.
No, my runner up for worst episode was Never Leave Me, because that was the episode where they have like Spike and Andrew locked up in the house, and it's just crap. So little happens, so little of interest is there. But what I decided to go for actually was Touched, which was the episode after Buffy has been kicked out of the Slayer house, and and it's just everyone like getting it on, and then while it has a good conclusion, which is Buffy deciding to go get the scythe, it's a nothing episode. It went nowhere. It contributed nothing. I didn't like it. It'd be the episode that I'd be least excited to watch again of this show potentially. Going back to it. Okay, who was your favorite character, Joel?
I should have left this blank. For up until now, because like my obvious answer is Buffy.
Well, I think it's a struggle to not name Buffy as the favorite actor.
It's hard for it not to be. So I think Buffy is kind of my answer in many ways.
Same,
but I feel that's not the most interesting thing I could talk about, because Buffy is great for all these obvious reasons. So otherwise, I think for this season, I'm going to say Faith.
Great.
And the reason why I want to say Faith is because I don't brief, but I think that this isn't. She's also she's also my favorite character of this season of Angel. Do you know what I mean? Like she has between the two, I kind of, even though those shows are distinct, her arc does carry between the two, and this was a real Faith year. It's a character that wouldn't necessarily have come back, and I think that what really enhanced the conclusion of the show for me this time was realizing how essential Faith is to Buffy's journey, and how essential it is to them have found their ground with each other by the end. And
Eliza Dushku is just wonderful as well.
I think she's absolutely charming. She could carry a TV show. She has done twice, I think, at least. Both shows I'm looking forward to watching my own time, kind of thing. And I've become a real Faith fan, I have to say, through this process. So for me, Faith coming back to join with Buffy to emancipate all the Slayers, love it.
I'm going to say Dawn. I think between that episode where she does empower Amanda, I think Dawn has like ultimately really learned from Buffy in this season. She is selfless, she is giving, she is thoughtful, comforting, emotionally aware. She's very much a helper. She wants to help like truly genuinely help. She's extremely young, very responsible, very knowledgeable and thoughtful. I have such a soft spot for Dawn just in general, and in this season I thought she really stood out. And I think she also like what she represents for Buffy, which is like her humanity and her future and her child self is like it's very beautiful, and I think it's a very important relationship at the core of this season.
Love it.
Great. Who was your least favorite character, Joel?
Robin.
Same.
And you know the thing,
I also have what I've written down.
Yeah, I felt kind of conflicted with this because
He had so much potential, though.
he's so much potential. And I
And
actually
it goes nowhere. And for me, he represents the season as a whole.
Yeah, me too. And I think it's a difficult burden in some ways. I think DB Woodside is great. I actually really enjoy him. He's very charismatic.
Great performance. Beautiful.
He actually fits in with the dynamic of the actors and the crew very, very well.
Totally agree.
It's just that his character, it does not go anywhere. It is so, from episode to episode, it's mysterious. It's like, okay, there's one thing he's about, which is mystery. And again, I think this becomes, what's the word I'm looking for? Prescient of modern television storytelling, the Stephen Moffat era of Doctor Who, all that kind of stuff, where it's like, it's promised questions with no answers, you know? And the big reveal, I think he has some interesting stuff around Nicky Wood. The reveal that he the Slayer's song, I think, is interesting. But he actually becomes, I think, incredibly infantilized after the Spike stuff and really sidelined in a way that actually I thought he'd be cooler to watch this time around. So unfortunately, I have to say wrong, but I like him. I like him a lot.
I totally agree with everything you said there. So I don't need to add anything. I totally agree.
Good.
I had him down to, he's my least favorite character. Who was your favorite bit character?
Yeah, like obviously a lot of bit characters in this, which I liked. I kind of went for Andrew.
Okay.
Because I think I was very skeptical going into the season if he could claw back into being a likable person or a redeemable character, and I think he gets there. I think Tom Lenk has a great performance and is a real pleasure having a scene. And I think the fact that by the end he doesn't feel he is exonerated for his like misogynistic and horrible behavior and doesn't try to be. All the things he gets slagged for by the show, that's one thing he does right. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I kind of I think his contributions towards from storyteller onwards really help bring a certain level of levity to the season where it doesn't necessarily have humanity. So for me it was Andrew.
Mine was Cassie.
Good one.
Yeah, I really like Cassie. I think she's a great character. I think she was great and funny and stupid and like so emo and like so of the time. I think that partially the reason I chose her is because she's by far my favorite appearance of the first in this season.
That's very impactful.
Yeah, it's a really good appearance of the first as Cassie. And I just felt that she was very human and sad and also stupid. Yeah, I really like Cassie. Okay, who was your least favorite bit character?
So again, a qualified one, Kennedy.
Okay.
And I don't hate Kennedy, and I don't have the inherent issues with her that I think a lot of fandom did at the time. But I think she brought some interesting conflict at times. By around the time that Buffy gets kicked out of the house and all that, where she should be introducing some kind of a nuanced conflict or some kind of a difference of opinion, she just seems naive. Yeah. And she just seems she said herself in the finale that she's a brat. She seems underinformed. And it's a little awkward to watch. So I think she walks on the page as well acted, and I think that she is I have no issue with her being Willow's kind of rebound girlfriend, or any of that kind of stuff. But as the source of necessary conflict for some of these plots, I found she was a bit weak in that side. So again, wouldn't kick her out of the cast, but her and Robin have similar kind of didn't really work the way they wanted to kind of issues for me.
So I chose Vi because I fucking hate Felicity Day as
you
an
really
actress.
Do.
As in, I'm sure she's a lovely person. I have no issue with the person.
Her
every single
style,
character that she plays, I fucking hate. I just hate that they focus on her so much in this episode as well. Really pissed me off. Do not like her. Wish she had died instead of every other potential instead. Do not like her. Think she's bad. Goodbye. Okay.
Did she die in this episode?
No, unfortunately. Yeah. She's like talking to Rona at the end, being like, "This is not a big deal. This is fine. We're gonna be fine." Blah, blah. I'm not sure why you're doing this. Anyway, who was your favorite monster? Sorry, no. Before that, what was your favorite outfit?
I went with Faith. I like Faith's style. I like how it's kind of matured.
Super sexy.
It is sexy, and I find Elijah Dushku very attractive. I think she has a lot of chaotic bi energy, which I really like.
She is extremely bisexual as a character. Yeah.
And in a Nox silly way, I do identify a little bit with Faith. It's kind of a viewpoint character in some ways, and I like how she dresses, and she does have a level of cool, which I kind of I think is is nice. So I'm always drawn to how she's dressed in a scene.
Yeah. I went for Giles, specifically in Giles in England, though he is wearing a jacket I don't like. But I think that's the beginning of his dad sweater energy era, where he is wearing like nice textures, more casual clothes, and looking incredible. Honestly, fashion icon. That's literally the way I want to dress. Yeah. Who was the worst outfit for you? It's
intentional, but it's Caleb.
Yeah, sure.
Like the
jeans,
the bootcut jeans, obviously the kind of, you know, it's a black preacher, but you also bought it from Pennies. It looks incredibly synthetic. The priest outfit on top of it, and also the terrible bowl haircut. Yeah. Like Nathan Fillion is an attractive man, and it is probably the most formless outfit that a character wears so consistently on the show. So yeah, Caleb.
Cool. My least favorite outfit was Molly, I think. The potential. Yeah. She just wears
the Union Jack t-shirt or whatever.
Yeah, and like various other awful things. I mean, like I would have chosen Vi because she also wears disgusting like stripy stuff all the time. But I chose Molly because Molly also like wears like bad fluffy jackets and stuff. Do not like the way she dresses. That's who I chose. Okay. Who was your favorite monster of the season?
So I can't read my handwriting, so I just managed to remember this, but I'm gonna go with Gnarl.
Yeah, I thought you would.
For obvious reasons. I think his name is Casey. Has Camden Toy, is that right? Camden Toy, yeah. So Gnarl is the monster from Same Time, Same Place when Willow comes back, and who can see her and paralyze her, but the others can't see her. And yeah, it's just a great performance. It's actually like a really well realized character in one episode. Really horrific, peels her skin off and all that. Talks quite a bit and yet manages to still be scary, because often that can really deflate a monster. And I think it's really good kind of just once-off character, once-off monster. Maybe one of the last actually scary monsters in the show. And I slashed that with the Turok, because I do love that. You know me, I love the concept of the Turok, the vampire, the vampire sphere, and definitely the first Turok that she has to fight is scary, and it's also a great idea that she has to fight
multiple episode kind of fight.
Yeah, exactly. So I like the Turok as well.
I went with best monster was Caleb, because I actually do think that he brings a lot to the season.
Agreed.
Should have been introduced way earlier. I think Nathan Fillion is great as the character, and I like the hate that he brings. Yeah,
and I think it actually adds a really interesting, really important like crystallization of that for this season.
Yeah. Who was your least favorite monster?
Lissa?
Is that Shanti?
See, if you're even asking me, it's obviously doesn't stand out. You remember? Yeah, it is a Shanti.
I just wrote down Shanti because I was too lazy to go look up what her
character
was.
But even when I was looking up, it's like, does this character have a distinct name? So I've already mentioned why I think the episode is trash, and I think that I think Shanti plays the character serviceably or whatever, but the point of that character being in the episode is that Shanti's going to guest star and play a monster. So the motivations are really unclear. Kind of knows a bit, like it feels like a if you remember a great video game you played, and it's like, oh yeah, apparently they had a DLC where we went and did this weird side mission, but what I really hate about it is that amongst the monster being really just Ashanti guest starring and seducing Xander up until a point, it only becomes a monster after she dies. It's like for 3 seconds it turns into like, we see the character design. I think the character design was actually reasonably okay, but it's so she can be a pretty lady during most of the episodes. Yeah. And I
wearing like nothing.
Yeah, it's boring. Yeah,
I had the same notes. Okay, that's Buffy done.
That's Buffy done.
Tick. Okay, let's do a reasonably quick Cordelia chase, shall we?
Yeah, of course. Which should be easy to do. So this episode is
Home.
Over Angel's home, and it is the setup for season 5 is the whole point of it. So palate cleanser, Jasmine's done, and the entire point of this is to get the Fang Gang into their Wolf from Heart. So Lila has come back and has told them, you know what, you did the best job of being evil that anyone's ever done. You ruined world peace. So we've decided to cede this territory to you, and it's a good episode. It's a romp. It's meant to be Hitchcockian. It's very much like, what's the premise here? By hook and by crook, they convince the whole gang to come in the mysterious limousine, go to Wolf from Heart, which has been rebuilt into an entirely new set, and find out what they could do as a business and as a champion's concern, if they had the resources that only the LA branch of Wolf and Heart would have. In the background of the whole thing where Connor's losing his fucking mind, basically, and he
holding
is
hostages.
Holding people's hostages, and just generally anyone who says that they like their family, he beats them up. And
I'd be safe.
Yeah. I'll very briefly say that like his side of the storyline ends with him kidnapping like families or tying up families, strapping loads of explosives to them that he's gotten from somewhere, and Angel turns up. Angel actually, Deborah Brown says a pretty actually emotional scene. I think that he's completely fucked this child. Do you know what I mean? Like it's ruined his life, and that he really has lost his mind. And Connor threatens to blow himself up basically and to kill everyone because he'll never be loved, etc. And working backwards, that's the motivation for Angel to take the deal, because again we cap the episode with us seeing that Connor, after they take the deal with Wolf from Heart, has had his memory wiped and has been placed with a loving family, and he seems happy, and Angel sees it through the window and is content. That's kind of the Connor stuff.
Oh, I wouldn't say not content. I think he's heartbroken.
Heartbroken, but I think there is an element that he's happy to see that he's happy. I think it is in there. I think the thread of that is in there. Yeah. But that's the least interesting part of the episode. The rest of it is them various scenes of like explicitly textually them being split up, divide and conquer, and taken with different people to see who they could be in season 5, essentially.
Fred can be head of the science division.
Yeah.
Gunn can go talk to the powers that be, and he wants to become a lawyer afterwards.
Basically how they seduce them is Lauren is very straightforward, even though they won't admit that he's gay. They're like, you can have all our entertainment contacts, you can be the biggest producer in LA, all that kind of stuff.
And they're like, oh, these are the people who are signed with us, and it's like, he's like, oh, them too. And
Neil Young.
It's clearly Brittany. Gunn.
Yeah.
Neil Young would never.
We have... Yeah, Gung's whole thing is basically he thinks they're bringing him to sign up as a security guard, but what they actually promise him is promise. They promise him potential. He's really weirdly like, do you come with the car to the woman who's showing him around? Yeah. But they promise him potential. Fred will be the head of the science division. That actually manifests into a storyline where it's Jonathan something.
I can't remember his name.
We'll come to him anyway because he's the main character, but he's from Conversations with Dead People as well on Buffy. He will be her second in command, and
it is what leads to her death, unfortunately.
Eventual death in season 5. And then Lila promises Angel the resources, promises that Cordelia will get the best medical care, whatever that means.
And mystical care. And that they'll be able to find, things like when Connor goes missing, they find them straight away, all that kind of stuff. And obviously eventually promises Connor's redemption or Connor's salvation. And then in probably one of the best scenes, or one of the best things of the season, I think, this is all fun, and this is like a great bit of adventuring and all that. Wesley is taken off to the best mystical library in the world by a rogue, or by an ex-resigned watcher, basically, a Rutherford Cirque. Cirque, incidentally, being the name of Hitchcock's most consistent assistant director. So it's meant, initially his name was going to be Rutherford Hitchcock to signal that the episode was Hitchcockian, and they said those two on the nose. Wesley grappling hooks out of the room, and basically his whole thing is that he goes to try and find Lila's contract, because he thinks if he destroys the contract she'll be freed from this eternal damnation she's in. Incredibly sweet and sad.
Yeah, it's the last scene with Lila Morgan in the show, and her in this episode, she's great, and her saying, him genuinely thinking that he's going to be able to free her, and her saying it's not going to work, but it means something that you try it. And that is actually really good. It's
kind of the premise of the show as well.
Yeah, and the Wesley and Lila relationship, surprisingly, I think actually really, really worked for me. And that's kind of it, I think, in terms of the interesting stuff. So we end...
What happens with Lila after this? She's just never spoken of again?
Gone to hell. Like, that's it. She says in this episode, I'm here for one day to be the person you recognise, to show you around, and she's written out after that. And
one of the things at the end of the episode is that Angel says in front of the Fang gang, show me where Connor is. And the gang afterwards says, who's Connor?
Yeah, so he's been erased kind of from everyone's memories. And it sets us up for season 5. It's the last time we see the hotel, last time we see Angel's convertible. All of that's kind of gone. It's essentially a fresh palette for Angel investigations. Can they do it without being evil? Season 5, yeah.
They can't unless they have one very important person working for them.
Yeah, who could it be?
Cannot fucking wait. It has so much Harmony content to the next season. I love it.
Harmony in all forms of Buffy media is implied to be like the survivor, the person who gets to the end. So 8 failed feminist gestures. I like this episode. It's fun. It clears the palette. I recognise these characters again. A lot of good stuff to it. Liked it.
Great. Yeah, I was going 8 failed feminist gestures as well.
Great.
Okay, and just to wrap up the Angel stuff, Joel, what was your favorite episode of Angel this season?
Orpheus.
Great.
So Orpheus is part of the Faith and Angelus multi-part arc, which is actually, I thought, really good and really surprised me. And Orpheus specifically is the one that concludes that where Faith goes into Angel's memory and Angel, Angelus and Faith fight their way out of it. So all of it kind of works together quite well, that arc. But that's probably the most interesting one for me. And also Willow is there. And Willow overpowers both Angelus and Jasmine and kicks ass. So having all that together, I think it's really good. And also transitions Faith to Buffy, which is something I really liked.
100%. I was considering Orpheus, I was considering Salvage as well, but actually decided in the end, Spin the Bottle for me. It is a moment of levity.
It's cool.
It's good thematically. It is just overall good. I really liked it. Okay. And what was your worst episode of the season?
Players.
Which was...
So Players is the second episode that has Gwen Reagan, the lightning thief, in it. So in the middle of all this stuff happening with the Beast and Jasmine and all that, they take a detour episode where Gong goes off for a solo adventure with Reagan, and he gets to be a spy, and they have a really contrived plot, and she talks about how she can't touch people because she is lightning. The first episode we heard is bad enough. It's like Mutant X
Ground
type
stage
stuff.
Oh, sorry. You mean it's the third episode overall? Yes, she's another episode at the beginning of the season.
Oh, okay, she may be, but the previous episodes then with her are weak enough. But this is like such a suction aside, and they are not a strong pairing together, and it's the wrong time to do it, and it's just boring. I didn't like it. So like obviously there's episodes which are turgid in this season of like Beast stuff, but this was like, why are we even watching this?
Mine, I was considering going for Graham State, which is the other Gwen episode, which is the auction episode, which is just absolute trash. But I decided to go for Sacrifice, which is actually the third last episode of the season, which was the one with them in the tunnels.
Yes, and the survivors and all
genuinely
that
truly awful. Fucking hated it. Did not like it in any way.
It would really drag it out.
Yeah.
Speaking of dragging it out.
Yeah. Okay. I think what we can do now is, just before we conclude, say a couple of thank yous to people.
Yes, absolutely.
And like, you know, we're obviously going to be coming back for a couple of bonus episodes. We are going to take a couple of weeks break, but say some thank yous. First off, we have to say thank you to Ian Carlos Crawford at SlayerFest98. But not, that's actually not his handle on anything. The host of SlayerFest 98, the other brilliant queer Buffy podcast. Ian's been wonderful throughout. He has consistently just like retweeted our shit, like always. I'd say it's a significant impact in terms of how many people actually discovered Buffy Boys. I remember the week that he answered an Instagram story saying, when someone asked, oh, what other Buffy podcast you listen to, he very kindly said us and said some nice things about us. We got a big kick in viewership that time. He's also just like a wonderful guy, very funny, very cute. So
absolute sweetheart.
Absolute sweetheart.
Yeah, as being as Brian, as he said, a great supporter of us, has been very encouraging. It's kind of, it's been nice to have another show that we're connected to, or we're in conversation with, and that's when it's been kind of ups and downs at various points and all that kind of stuff. But also just in the most literal sense, like it's been an incredible example of queer solidarity. I think it's also a queer Buffy show, and I really felt that it's been a real positive, so thank you, Dean. Yeah.
I just want to say thanks to like all the people that we know who listen to the podcast. So that was people like Keen listened to the whole thing. Kieran had never watched Buffy. Aoife, my sister. Gary, our friend, listened to a lot of the podcast. I think he dropped out because he couldn't distinguish between what we told him in the podcast anymore and what we said to him in person.
Reality and fiction, yeah.
Tara, who I work with, listened to a lot of the podcast, which I really appreciated. Dara listened to the whole thing in the space of like 2 months, which, God, are you okay, Dara? So thank you for all those. Your mother listened to a significant amount of the podcast as well, which I really appreciate.
She'll catch up with this eventually as well. Emma, of course.
Emma, of course. Emma. Yeah, I think Carl as well listened to a lot of the podcast at the beginning. So thank you so much to all those people.
I'm sure we probably missed someone out there. We have a few friends in there who have definitely listened here and there. And
Liz, I listened to a good bit.
Absolutely. So many people. So if I have missed you out, apologies, but I am aware of you, and it touches me right on the inside of my heart every time that someone makes the effort for it. Particularly, I think it's such a big ask when you know someone to be like, listen to my podcast. I know. They did, and particularly early on, that kind of stuff has been really encouraging. So I'm very, very, very grateful to that.
Yeah. Thank you to the listeners of the podcast.
Yeah,
like so much. Like I have no idea why or how you bothered, but thank you for listening to the podcast. It means so much. Really, genuinely, so much.
Yeah, it's kind of changed our lives in many ways.
Yeah, a little bit. Joel,
Brian,
thank you. I love you a lot. I wouldn't want to do this with anyone else.
I love you too. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
And Joel, What do you say? Do you want to go around again?
Sure.
Okay.
So, folks, thank you very much for listening. This has been Buffy Boys. We have been the Buffy Boys.
Don't tell anyone. It's already done.
See ya.
Bye.